What is up, Awake? Are you still just thinking about the Awake conference? Because I am. It was just such a place where God showed his faithfulness, his love, and his intentionality to have you there to worship, to hear messages, and just to have fun. I hope that there's a place where you felt that God encouraged you and called you into something new and something next. And so for us here at Awake, our next series is called Let's Talk About It. And this is a chance for us to jump into culture and say, hey, what are you talking about? We want to talk about that too. We want to talk about what's going on the TV, in the movies, in books, our magazines, in your phone, in your room, all these different things that we want to jump in and join. And so for tonight, let's talk about sex. Yes, sex. So take a deep breath because we can do this. It feels like sex is a topic that is talked about everywhere else except for church. Like we know that it's easy, or we hear about it at school, in the lunchroom, in the locker room. We could hear about it at work or when we're walking home. And we as Awake want to join in on this conversation and speak some biblical truths. And so first I want to say is that God is not surprised by sex. He created sex. In the beginning, God created male and female. And the first commandment that we got to the male and female is to be fruitful and multiply. Make babies, and you do that by having sex. Like this is just set up for us. And it's so interesting that with Adam and Eve, when they got this commandment, this idea that they would be unified, they would be joined together, and the Bible likes to say that they were naked and they felt no shame. And so when I look at these first just like parts to think through, there's no shame, there's no comparison, and there's no competition. Like this was the beginning mind of marriage and sex, is to eliminate the shame, the competition, and the comparison. And that sounds great until you turn the page in the Bible, you get to chapter 4, and a man is already taking on 2 wives. And throughout Genesis, this idea of what was supposed to be whole and good starts to fall apart as both men and women don't uphold sex well. Something that was supposed to be fun and fruitful has now turned into something that there's oppression, there is being taken advantage of, and there is no longer unity, there is competition, and there is comparison. And so it surprises me that at the end of Genesis, there comes a character that says, no, I'm not going to do that this way. I'm not going to have sex this way. I'm not going to do it out of order. And so I want to introduce you to a guy named Joseph. Now, Joseph is a part of God's family, the Israelites. So God has set aside a promise, a land, and a way to say, hey, I'm going to be with your family through and through. And the Israelites' family was one that had a lot of issues with sex, of like, what's going on here? What should we do? What should we not do? And so you get to Joseph's family line, and his family tree has a lot of branches. See, Joseph had 10 brothers at this time and at least 1 sister. And he, of course, had his mom, his dad. He then had basically 3 stepmoms. So that meant that all the brothers were like half brothers and stepbrothers and the stepsister. And you get the thing. You get the story here because some of you, that's your reality. You have how many are stepbrothers and how many are stepsisters and who's our half, and they're on the other side. And so you have this all going on. And with Joseph's dad and these wives, then there is competition, there is comparison, which falls down to the brothers and the sister. And this is then where we find Joseph. Now, Joseph got to be dad's favorite. Like he's very open about, he gets the best gifts, the best clothing, he gets praise and everything. And so of course those brothers are like, no, thank you. To the point where one day they dig a hole in the ground, a giant pit. They toss Joseph in, and Joseph can hear them at the top of this hole saying, should we kill him or should we sell him? I would say these brothers had a lot going on here to have that conversation to say, man, this is just rough for Joseph. They do decide actually to sell him to some slave traders that are going to Egypt. This is where then I want to pick up the Bible and say, okay, what's happening with Joseph now? Because it's fascinating that God takes Joseph and places him in a high-ranking Egyptian's home and makes Joseph just awesome at his job. So much that his boss trusts Joseph with just about everything. So let's take a look at the Bible. We're going to be reading in Genesis chapter 39. Here we go. Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. "Come and sleep with me," she demanded. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." She kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he went in to do his work. She came and grabbed him by the cloak, demanding, "Come on and sleep with me." Joseph tore himself away, but he left the cloak in her hand as he ran from the house. See, there are so many things in this story to set up our topic for tonight, which is to run from sexual sin. And you might be wondering, like, why should I run from it? Well, here's some 3 things that we've learned through our time in relationships. The first one is the further you go, the faster you go. The further you go, the further you want to go. And the further you go, the harder it is to go back. Let me read those again for you. The further you go, the faster you go. The further you go, the further you want to go. And the further you go, the harder it is to go back. See, there comes a time in a relationship where it all of a sudden feels like talking isn't enough. It feels like holding hands isn't enough anymore. It feels like kissing isn't enough anymore. And so we have this mentality of like we have to keep going forward, when maybe the question is, can we slow down, or can we start to say, hey, let's run in an opposite direction until we're ready for that? And so what I love here is that Joseph really maps this out well for us of how are we supposed to then run from sexual sin. And I hope this helps you out too. So the first point we've got then is that we want to run by being in groups. Look at the text again. See what Potiphar's wife is doing and see what Joseph is doing. See, Potiphar's wife is looking at Joseph lustfully. She's being very open that she wants to sleep with him. And Joseph then is trying to avoid her. He's trying to stay out of her way. And I really think that if Joseph is in this large house of the Egyptians, then there's more servants. And so my mind goes to like, this is like TV sitcom silly stuff that's happening here between Joseph and Potiphar's wives and all the other servants. They're like, oh my goodness, Joseph, she's in the kitchen. Go somewhere else. Go over there. Or like, oh no, Joseph, she's coming down the hall. Quick, get in the closet. Or just like, oh no, Joseph, the cow needs milk. Go outside. Or, I've spilled the bread basket and jams all over you. Go home and change. Like, I think all of the servants are on Team Joseph to say like, man, that girl is bad luck. Don't even be around her. And yet we have just Potiphar's wife that's just waiting for him to be alone. And in verse 11, we get that. She found him when no one else was around. And if you want to know when I didn't run from sexual sin, it was when no one else was around, when no one else was in the car, when no one else was in the basement, when no one else was in the room. This is when things started to fall apart for me. And so I'm asking then, are you always making sure that you're in a group when you're with the person that you like? And I don't always mean that that's going to be fun or easy, but there's this sense that there is protection by being in the group to say, no, not yet. I'm going to stay away from that at this moment. And I need this group accountability to help me through this. See, for Joseph, if he would have pursued sex with Potiphar's wife, he would have lost his job. It wouldn't have been worth it to him. This idea that having sex before the route or the way that it's supposed to go, there's a trade-off in that. And Joseph, I think, knows this because he changes the script. Like, I love that moment that in verse 8, it says, but Joseph refused. Again, throughout all of Genesis, this is a game changer. In verse 9, he understood that this was going to be a great sin against God. And in verse 12, he runs away. And remember, she grabs the cloak. So he's probably like literally running away from the sin, probably fairly naked. And so our first thing there then, again, is that we run by staying in groups. Our second point is that we run by having an accountability friend. In this story, we have Potiphar. And while Potiphar and Joseph probably weren't like kickback hangout friends, Potiphar does in this story play the standard, play the person that everybody has to be accountable for what gets done in his house, and really accountable for what gets done with his wife, or hopefully not with his wife. And so in this story, Joseph recognizes that, hey, I can't sleep with Potiphar's wife because you are his wife, like you are my boss's wife. And yet I wonder then for us is, do we have somebody that's holding us accountable in our relationships? Do we have a friend that's able to say, hey, what are your boundaries and how can I help you keep them? And this gets really hard because the question is like, can we trust our friend? Are we afraid that we would lose a friendship over this? And it's really rocky waters. But I know that for myself, my sophomore year of high school, when I was starting to date someone, I had a friend and I said, hey, here are my boundaries. Can you help me out in this? And so my friend knew that anytime that I hung out with a boy that I liked, he knew that if we were alone or we were in groups, if we went out to dinner, like my friend knew all of this. And so there'd be times where at the end of the night, my friend would text me and say, hey, how'd it go? How are your boundaries doing? And sometimes I'd answer like, hey, it's great. We just like hung out and played cards together or whatever it was. And there were other times that text would come through and I go, ugh, they're texting and asking again. And this wasn't necessarily regret to come mind. My mind usually went to frustration and like, how dare you? How dare you ask if I was okay? Of course I'm okay. And that was the key that I was like, no, not okay. Those boundaries, they're getting close to being compromised, or they were compromised. And now I have to fess up to my friend that I've messed up. And what am I supposed to do except that this was so important in my relationships of how my friend was able to help me keep my boundaries and keep my body safe in these ways. And so we have this hard question then when I say, hey, do you have an accountability friend? Is you're going to be weighing of like, yeah, but I don't know if I trust anybody with that. Or at the same time, I don't want to, if I'm somebody else's accountability friend, like I don't want to lose the friendship. I don't want to tell them that they're wrong and all of this. And this is my hard question then is, do you care more about the friendship, just having the friendship, or do you care more about keeping your friend safe? So our last point from the evening is that we run by fasting. And this one's kind of fun, right? Because you run fast. Okay, maybe it's a different type of fasting. This is a fast that says, hey, I'm going to say no to food right now so that I can say no to my body and hear from God. And I want to apply this to this idea of whenever my mom and I had to have the sex talk, she always did it when we were on the road going somewhere else, like 60 miles an hour. Like we're on the interstate, we're on the highway, and she's over there talking. And I'm like, if I like tuck and roll right now, could I survive? If I just like, let's get out, Mom, I don't want to talk about this. And this is just when she had these conversations. And one of the tips that she gave me that it took a while to set in, I'll be honest, was to don't get into a position where your body says yes so loud it can't hear your mind say no. Said another way, don't get in a position where your body says yes so loud that it can't hear God say no, not yet. And this had me thinking about, well, how loud is my body? Like I think that I can, sneak around, play hide and seek. Maybe you've snuck out before. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just saying we have this idea that we're quiet people, except when it's fourth period and lunch is almost coming around and it's really quiet and then yours is the stomach that growls and you're like, oh, that's so embarrassing. Don't be so loud. Or the stomach flu goes through your house. It went through ours. And whenever that happens, we call it calling the dinosaurs. Like, tell me, can you throw up quietly? No, your body is so loud. If you get a headache, you sprain an ankle, your stomach hurts. There's this idea that it feels like your body is loud. You get angry and you want to punch something. Your body feels so loud. And so I'm curious then if we can have these chances to say, hey, let's practice saying no. Let's, in a safe, easier environment, let's say, how can I start to tell my body no? And so one of the ways that you can fast is through a meal. I'm not asking you to fast all day right now. I'm not asking you to fast even lots of days. Just for one meal, what would it look like to say no to your body? In this way for you to recognize like how loud is my body? How much am I now thinking about how I would just love a snack? Or is my head starting to hurt because I haven't been eating, or am I more tired? Of just a way to say, hey, let me tune into my body to say, this is what's happening here. Can I practice saying no? Now, for some of you, fasting is not a great idea. One meal or any, because again, fasting is not dieting. It is not self-sabotage. It is not a way for you to attack your body. It's a way to say, I'm in a spot to listen. If you're in sports, if you have medical realities, if food scarcity is a real thing for you, don't fast food. Pick something else, like maybe it's social media, maybe it's your phone, to say, hey, I'm gonna turn my phone off. I'm gonna fast from this for a couple hours. Or I'm gonna turn off Instagram and TikTok for a full day to say, I'm gonna listen to my body and how it reacts to this. Can I control my eyes and what I see? Can I control my hands and holding my phone or scrolling? Can I just try and say, okay, what is my body doing in this moment that I have to actively say no to? And this is a way then to prepare you for your own time with running from sexual sin, to say, hey, can I at least know how to say no to my body? And so again, you may be asking yourself, why should I run? Why should I try to avoid sexual sin right now? And I've got one more verse from 1 Corinthians. It reads, run from sexual sin. No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. Don't you realize that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. What I love about this verse is the emphasis that God bought you back. All of you, your mind, your body, your soul, he bought you back. And Joseph realizes this in his story, that his body was not his own, that he belonged to God. He belonged to whatever God had in store for him, and he was going to wait for that. For us and for you who loves Jesus, you get to know that you belong to God and God bought you back. Your body, your soul, your emotions, your thoughts, these all get to belong to God. And we get this chance to believe that God does want the best for me. He does want the best for me in the realm of relationships and in the realm for sex. And so we want to have a chance to believe that. And so tonight in Tribes, I'm asking you to take this leap to say, hey, let's keep this conversation going and let's talk about this topic. And so let me pray for you real quick. Father God, I don't know why sex has to be so awkward and weird. And so I just ask that you take that thought, that emotion away from our tribes tonight, so that they can be open about where they're at with their relationships, that they can have hopes for what a relationship with someone else looks like, God, and that we can have a chance to protect our bodies. God, help us to run in groups, to find somebody that can hold us accountable, and how we can be in tune with our bodies so that we can more clearly hear your voice. God, we love you. Amen.